What was this not? Well, this one wasn't even recording.
That's okay. We have these other, this is why we have backups, right?
This is why we have backups. Jesus fucking Christ. Welcome back, guys, to Life with Purpose podcast. I'm Amanda.
I'm Kat.
Today we're talking about friend breakups.
Friend breakups, friend fallouts.
And how they're worse than regular breakups.
So worse than regular breakups.
They really are, though. Like, I feel like it's always way more traumatic. And then, like, so you and I both had friend breakups recently.
Very recently.
It's one of those weird things that we have in common.
Yes.
And so today we're going to talk about your friend breakup. I forgot where I was going with that.
Your friend breakup as well.
Yeah, we'll do mine in another episode. So yeah, we'll just talk about like what happened and why, and like kind of the perspective that you took away from that situation.
Definitely.
I feel like they're almost worse than partner breakups because like you have to bond in like such a different way. Like a romantic breakup, like
it could always be like a romantic breakup, like fizzles out, right? Like you pass the honeymoon stage, you start realizing like the real part of people. And then like in those sort of breakups, I kind of feel like it's we just weren't compatible. But with a friend breakup, especially if it's been a friend for like a good amount of time, it's one of those things of I trusted you so much. I poured so much into you. And now we have to act like we just never known each other.
I think it's also interesting too because the first thing that came to mind for me was that I was like with romantic breakups, like you almost expect them to happen, right? Like
right.
You're like, this is just a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and eventually we'll break up, or like if we get married, you're like, oh, like the divorce rate is like 60% now, or like that's probably wrong.
I think honestly, no, I think it's like right.
The divorce rate is high. Not that I want to be divorced, but like you just or you know, you come to the end of your life and like your spouse passes away, like you just eventually like you know that person is not going to be there anymore for whatever reason. And like with friends, also because of like the onset of technology and the way that we're able to keep in touch with one another, you expect those friendships to last forever.
Yeah.
And like we have the way to communicate. Even if you move across the world, we have ways to like continue friendships. And so you don't expect them the way that you would expect a romantic breakup.
Definitely every friend breakup I've had has kind of come out of left field for me, I feel. And then, you know, looking back on things, I can still sometimes say that. And sometimes I'm like, no, there were signs. There are definitely signs.
There are red flags in friend breakups too.
Definitely. And like hindsight's always 20/20, right? So you're just kind of like, wow, you weren't the person I thought you were, which kind of is what happened definitely in this story. So
let's hear it.
I'm jump right into it. For privacy purposes, I'm going to change their names. I still want to be respectful of their privacy, and I still have respect for them, and I still have love in my heart for them. And so I don't want anybody reaching out or doxing or anything like that. So for the sake of this story, I had two really great best friends. The first one I'm going to call Abigail, and the second one I'm going to call Oliver. So starting off, I actually met Oliver when I was freshly 18. And figuring out my sexuality and started going to like gay bars with another friend.
Oh, I didn't realize that you had known him for so long.
Yeah.
I thought he was a recent friend as well.
No, I had known him for over 10 years. We actually figured out that we were moving to Colorado around the same time. And it was not planned. He was literally getting out here like a month before I got here. It just was happenstance. He just posted on Facebook at the time, like, I'm moving out to Colorado. And I was like, oh my God, me too. And so like, that's how we like.
It's weird that you guys were friends though and didn't have a conversation about it.
Yeah. So like at that time, so what had actually happened was at that time, I had met him when I was 18. He ended up moving out of the very small Texas town to Arizona because that's where his family was. That's where his mom was and everybody. So he was only there for about a year in Texas, but we like stayed in touch. Not a whole lot, like not super deeply, but we did stay in touch. And so he was actually living in Arizona still. And I finally moved out here when I was 25. So some like years had passed. So we weren't like super close, but like still like kept in touch kind of thing. When we got out here, he was a completely different person to me, I feel. And I'm sure I was to him as well. But he was a completely different person. The things he believed were completely different. His mindset and like just loving people for who they were was just a complete different. And as our friendship and we, got closer and started hanging out more and everything, there was slowly small changes that he was making in his belief. One of them being about religion. That is a whole other episode we can get into. But one of them being, about religion, and he made a complete 180 from, believing that there is some sort of higher power to completely being atheist, which is not a problem. Definitely believe what you believe. But the biggest thing that changed for him was, as time was passing, he began to create this kind of prejudice against white people, which was very hard for me because I don't care what kind of color skin you have. I don't care. I care, of course, to an extent. For people, for me, I'm vibes. I want to feel your vibes. I want to see if we are, somebody compatible, or if we're just going to be acquaintances. I don't have to be friends with everybody, but he just really started forming a big prejudice against white people. And the part that really sucked about that is that, like, he was half white. Yeah, and so, like, he kind of, like, distanced himself from half of him, and then started forming this kind of character of, like, if you don't believe what I believe, for one, I'm going to verbally chastise you and tell you exactly why you shouldn't believe that. And two, if you don't agree with that, it was kind of like you felt like ousted from the group. So we started forming like a pretty good friend group, and what I started to recognize was a lot of the people that were in our friend group came in because of him. So like he was the glue that like each person was like, I know Oliver, so therefore like coming into this friend group. Well, my other ex-best friend, Abigail, so funny. I actually first met her when I first moved up to Colorado, and we met on Tinder.
Love Tinder.
Love Tinder, yeah.
I have a sidebar about Tinder. So when I was still a hoe and I had Tinder,
We all have our days.
we all had our whole summer. Was on Tinder, and I was dating like 3 different people at a time, but like not like seriously dating, just like a couple dates. They were all named Matt for some reason, and then I had my roommate Matt, and then we have our mutual friend Matt, and so at the time I had 5 Matthews in my life, and there was this one that he was a bouncer. And one night he had like really irritated me. I know this is like such a bizarre sidebar, but he like had really irritated me. And so I came home and I was like, oh, he's such a douchebag. So we like branded him Douchebag Matt.
I remember you telling me that story. That was hilarious.
So then there was like roommate Matt, there was Ray Fan Matt, there was so then we had Douchebag Matt, and then like I forgot what the other 2 were, but anyways, that's my Tinder story.
I love this for you. Getting all the math.
All the math.
So Abigail, I met on Tinder. We started hanging out and talking and stuff. And I quickly realized that her and I were not going to work out romantically because I was too busy, and she definitely wanted a lot more of my time. At that time, I was also dating a few people, and she knew that as well. I was very transparent with that, and everybody I was dating, I kind of ended up in this position where I made myself have a choice between Abigail and a very traumatic ex that I should have never dated. I kind of made myself have a choice between that. And it was so funny because like later on, hindsight being 2020, I was like, I didn't have to choose either of them. Like I could have chosen me.
Yeah, you could have chosen me.
And I could have saved so much heartbreak. It's fine. That's another story.
You never know until you know.
Exactly.
They don't suck until they suck.
Valid. So her and I ended up like kind of losing touch. I ended up moving across the country with the toxic ex. It lasted 6 months after we moved. We only lasted 6 months after I moved out of Colorado. And when I moved back, Abigail at the time was also ending a relationship that really meant a lot to her. And so when I moved back, she kind of reached out to me. We kind of like struck up conversation, and she ended up breaking up with the toxic girlfriend that she had at the time. She started battling some very like deep alcoholism. She was using alcohol to cope with a lot of things. There was one day that I met her at a museum, and she was actually drunk and had like a flask in her jacket like that whole time. Didn't even realize it because she was like a functioning alcoholic. But what I started doing was making sure that I like pulled her into our friend group because I was still friends with Oliver and that whole group. And I started pulling her into our friend group, and I started like making her get around people, not be alone, helping her kind of battle through this, which kind of sucked because at the same time I was still very much battling my heartbreak from this person I thought I was going to marry. And so it was really hard, but also at the same time, like I was just kind of like, this is almost helping me help her because I don't have to think about all the stuff that I was
Focus on other people's problems so you don't have to focus on your own.
Exactly. That was the route I took. And so after all of this happened, we became like really, really great friends, really close friends. I started a ladies who brunch group chat with them, and we would like often go get brunch, and we would just like find little nuggets where we could hang out. But also at the same time, I had decided to completely focus on school. So I started becoming very, very busy. And with me completely focusing on school, I was a full-time student, typically had between 5 to 6 classes at a time, and was also juggling anywhere between 3 to 4 part-time jobs. And so I began to get extremely busy. It's so funny. I had a conversation about this with my therapist just yesterday, and even they were like, every time I would end a session with you, like I would always just sit back and think like, how the fuck is Kat doing this? How has she not broken? Mm-hmm. And I look back on it too, and I'm like, I don't know what I had to been on. I was caffeine. That's where my caffeine addiction started. And so anyways, we became really close and great friends and everything. A big fallout started to happen with me and Oliver. I was not necessarily liking the way he was treating me. He was treating people in my life, like the girlfriend I was dating at the time. And he just seemed to call the shots. Like it always kind of felt like he was the ringleader. And if we didn't fall in line, then you were just like out. And I was starting not to like that. And it really sucked because me and Oliver were roommates at the time. We were renting an apartment in downtown Denver. So whenever I started to like notice all these things, Abigail was the one I would confide in. But we were so close that like one of my part-time jobs was doing Uber Eats, and we would just be on the phone for hours while I was Ubering. It was insane. Like I had never like had a close friend relationship that close before. So as I was talking to Abigail about everything that was going on, I started to realize that like she would tell me something, and then I'd get home and like have like a little chat with Oliver, and he would tell me something completely different. I also started realizing that they were starting to hang out a lot without me, which was fine because I was really busy at the time. But Abigail wouldn't ever tell me that they hung out.
She's like almost hiding it.
Yeah. She was like hiding a lot of it. And so I was just kind of like, okay, this is not feeling right. This is feeling weird. Things really started coming to a head whenever I could just like tell that like I was being ousted by Oliver. Like I could really tell that that's what was happening. He had ousted his own cousin from our group before. Yeah, like he was the ringleader. He called the shots. And so I started realizing this was happening. And at the same time, I started very much spiraling. I felt like I was starting to lose everybody in my life. My relationship with my sister particularly was not going very well at all. She was somebody I would confide in a whole lot too. I was losing them. At the same time, I was trying to keep my head above water. Like I was broke all the time. I was risking losing my car. Like so many things were happening until one day, my birthday of 2022, I did not get any sort of a happy birthday acknowledgement from Oliver, which I expected. But Abigail texted me and was like, hey, happy birthday. Please let me know when you're free. I want to like grab dinner and celebrate your birthday with you. And so I responded to that text and I said, hey, thank you so much. Like, here's the times that I'm free. Please let me know. And I never heard from her again. So I wanted to kind of give that backstory to kind of lead into some recent developments in that. Ever since that fall, I knew that there was no salvaging things with Oliver. I loved Abigail and I wanted her in my life. She was somebody I truly, truly loved. And so after that whole fallout, she had started unfollowing me on Instagram. She still had me as a friend on Facebook, but like it was just really weird.
I feel like Facebook is like I still want to be a little bit nosy, and I know that nobody really uses this platform anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
So like that's a big excuse to keep you
For
there.
sure. I mean, honestly, the only reason I still have mine is because that's how my family communicates.
But like when
it wasn't for them.
When they unfollow you on Insta, like that's when it's real.
Yeah, definitely. And so a while ago, a couple weeks ago, I am driving home from work, and again, I have not spoken to Abigail since my birthday of August of 22. Driving home from work, and I get a random follow request on Instagram, and it is from her. And so I'm like spiraling, right? At that point, like
Why?
How, what do you, like, what does this mean? Like,
did I do something?
Did I
trigger
and then
this?
I'm replaying, like, all the bad things that happened, and, like, you know.
When in reality, she just stopped talking to you.
Yeah. You know, and so it's one of those crazy things. I got home and just, like, cried to Haley about it. I ended up having therapy that next day and talked to my therapist about it. And my therapist was kind of just like, you know, if you want to, like, reach out, like, I think that you should. Maybe this will, like, have some closure. Maybe you guys can, like, get a better understanding of each other and what happened. And so I got on my guts from my therapist that night. And so right after I hopped off therapy, texted Abigail, or I messaged Abigail through Instagram. And so I was just like, hey, I see we're following each other from afar, like through social media. Would you be down to chat? And then I just kind of left it off and was like, and I also hope that you're doing well. Like 15 minutes later, she responded to me. I didn't expect her to respond that fast. And she responded to me, and it really sucked because what she said was like so her. Like, you know, those like little isms of people, and you're just like, I love that little ism about you. The message she sent back was, yeah, we both nosy. And like I could just like hear it in her voice, and like it made me miss her that much more, because I was like, those little things would make me laugh so much, like by being authentically herself. But after that, she sent me a message. She was like, yeah, that sounds good. And so we coordinated and made plans to do a FaceTime call that Friday. I wanted things to be face to face, but she has since moved out of the state. So we hop on that FaceTime call, and it was almost like another heartbreak again, but a heartbreak that I was ready to shield myself from. And I'm so happy that I have such a great community surrounded around me now. Because the very first thing I did whenever we hopped on this call is purposefully, I was like, I want you to tell me from your perspective how you feel things went, where you were at. Like, I'm listening 1000%. I am listening to understand. I'm not listening to respond. I want you to tell me exactly from your point of view everything that you feel happened. And so her biggest complaint to me about our friendship is that she said it was one-sided. I was giving, or I was taking and not giving. And so I was like, okay, like, can you elaborate on that? And so she was like, there were so many times I would ask you to like hang out or whatever, and you wouldn't make time to like hang out with me. And so I was like, okay, I understand where you're coming from with that. And she was just like, also you were just not acting yourself. You were going off and making choices that you shouldn't be making, and kind of things like that. And I was like, yes, I was mentally unwell at that time, for sure. There was a whole lot going on and happening in my life. But fair, you know, if that's something that you didn't feel you could handle in that moment, I'm trying not to fault you for that. And so when those were kind of like the biggest takeaways that I got from that conversation. And so after that, I was just kind of like, you know, I can't even put into words how busy I was. Like, I can't even put into words that like I didn't even have time to sneeze wrong, or I was losing it. And I was so overwhelmed, and now thinking back on it, like I was definitely in a manic depressive episode throughout this like entire time. I was not mentally stable. I was taking on way too much. I was putting way too much on my plate. I was not making the best decisions, for sure. I was almost self-sabotaging myself in different ways. And also looking back on it, I'm kind of like, you self-sabotaged when you were pretty much kind of a raging alcoholic for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for that, even though I didn't have what my therapist always calls spoons, your mental spoons of like,
I love spoon theory.
I love spoon theory, yes. So even though I didn't have the spoons,
wait,
I was.
Cyber, we should make that our first t-shirt. I love spoon theory.
Even though like I was dealing with a very, very emotional breakup, like considering suicide, like that's how deep I was hurting. I tried to be there for you. Like I did my best. And so I was just kind of like, okay, like I understand. And so the very, very first thing after she finished telling me what she felt and all of that, the very, very, very first thing I said was, I sincerely apologize. Like I sincerely apologize for any way that I may have made you feel. That was not my intent to ever make you feel that way, but I understand that was the impact of it. I was very careful with my words, and I was very much like, I am sincerely so sorry. Like I was not showing up my best self in that time. And so then I started kind of asking her, I was just kind of like, you know, I kind of feel like you made a choice between me and Oliver. And I was like, and I know I never asked you to make any choice. I don't know if he ever asked you to make a choice, but you did either way. And you chose him. And so I was just kind of like, can you tell me a little bit more about that and like why? And basically her answer to that was he made time for me. He would actually go out and do things with me. And so I was like, okay, cool.
What's almost upsetting, I'm just going to interject for a second, is that like one thing that I've really learned about my friendships and like the relationships that I have is that as you get older, like your ability to be there for one another in different capacities changes. And so I always say that like when you love someone, sometimes you go through these changes and you have to learn to love them differently. But like I have friends who I love with my whole heart, who I know are just so beyond busy that we schedule each other in months in advance. I have one of my really good friends. I have not seen her in a while. I ran into her at the hockey game, but I think over like a month and a half ago. We had put each other down on our calendars for May. So like it's frustrating to hear that someone said that to you, because when you give grace to someone who's busy like that, then like you allow them to live their life and you make time for them when they have it.
And well, and not just that, but like I may have not been able to physically show up,
but you said you were on the phone all
spending
the time.
Hours on the phone with each other.
Yeah.
Like even if we weren't talking and we were just like doing our like mundane things, like, and we would so often like even mention to each other, like, it is so crazy that like we have this great friend relationship where we can just like not even be talking to each other. We're just like doing our daily things, but it's nice to have that person there. Like we were so fucking close. So it like hurt, and you know, like my point to her was like I couldn't be there physically, but I was doing what I could. I was doing my best. Apparently that wasn't a good enough answer. She then makes sure that she mentions that the new place she's living, she has amazing friends who would never do anything like this to her, and she never thought she'd meet such amazing people and stuff. And so I was just kind of like, wow, that's a dig. I knew that was a dig. And throughout that entire conversation, she never once apologized. The only thing she ever said to me was, "I'm sorry you felt that way," which is a backhanded apology, even though I was very intentional with what I said. And so that conversation hurt me more than anything. And for the first time, I let myself feel anger about that entire thing. Like this entire time I had felt sadness. I put so much blame on myself, which is another thing my therapist even pointed out, because Ricky, shout out to Ricky, was there with me that entire time. I've been working with Ricky for almost 4 years now. It'll be 4 years in June, I believe. And like they were with me that entire time. Like they saw me break down like I've never broken down before. And so I was just kind of like, you know, that entire time I would thought I was a problem. And now like hearing your side of things just makes me realize like you couldn't be the friend that I needed you to be. You were somebody different. I painted a picture of you in my head that you just weren't. And that's on me. That's my fault. And also I'm not going to put blame on myself anymore. And so after that happened, I kind of went through anger a little bit, and God bless Haley because she is my rock. I could just go to her with anything. She may not always have the best advice, but she's a great listener.
She's a good listener.
She's a great listener. Advice back, not so much, but we laugh about that all the time. But anyway, so after I kind of like did this kind of like mad spell and just like really did my best to like work through that, I was talking to my boss about everything. Me and my boss are very close. I was talking to my boss about everything and kind of explaining to him what happened. And so like during that conversation with him, I was just kind of like, you know what? Like I almost kind of feel like I just want to go into social media and just like unfollow her, just unfriend her. Like I think that may just be the healthiest thing I do at this point. And he was like, you know, I think that's smart. So later on that day, I get back home and I'm just like scrolling through Instagram and I come across this like, it was like little inspirational postings that just like randomly pop up from accounts you don't even follow. But it was talking about how like you just get negativity out of your life. And so I was like, yeah, like I thought following and unfriending Abigail today. And so at the same time, I was like, wait, like I haven't seen her post anything to her story in a minute. And usually she's like posts every day to her story. Okay, so I noticed she hadn't posted anything to her story, or I hadn't seen it come up that she had posted something to her story. Sorry to burp for a second. And so then I went and searched for her and realized that she had already unfollowed me and made me unfollow her. and had unfriended me on Facebook. And so it was just one of those like really eye-opening things of like, I put so much blame on myself always. And I'm always the one to like apologize and be forgiving and be there for you. And in this instance, you just showed me your true colors and threw digs at me.
What is the new saying? Like, not to be so brash about it, but the trash takes itself out.
I've never heard that before, and I love it.
Yeah, I think it's like a big thing in the Swiftie community right now, but the trash takes itself out every single time.
You're right. You're right, because even after that, I was just kind of like, you know what? Like, you were never the person I thought you were. I made up a scenario of a person I really hoped you were in my head, and now that I take a big step back, I realize that you were never that.
Well, and one of the things when you told me this story off camera, one of the things we talked about was how I pointed out to you that she re-added you on Insta with no regard to what that would do to you mentally. That re-adding you would send you spiraling. That you had this big falling out, and it's like common sense, you know. If you've ever had like an ex refollow you or an ex reach out to you, or
Yes.
your heart stops and you're like, why is this person reaching out?
1000%.
And she just did that with no regard to what it would do to like the rest of your evening. And in your conversation, like you started off with an apology about the way that things went down, and you got the I'm sorry if.
Exactly. And to speak even more to that, I think one of the other kind of really polarizing things that happened in that conversation was I was talking to her and I was telling her, like, I remember our very last voice conversation we had with each other when I called you, because I called her when I was completely moving out of the apartment with Oliver and I was like stressed about things. And I said, you know, the very last thing you ever said to me was on my birthday. And then after that, you just ditched. And she stops and she goes, I did that on your birthday? That really sucks with me. Still no apology.
Still no apology.
Still no apology. And then she was like, you know, communication goes both ways. Like you could have called me. I shouldn't have to be the one to call you. And I said, after you left off our last conversation that way, on my fucking birthday, I ended up running into her and Oliver and the whole friend group I used to belong to at Anderson Farms, which was a big fun
Halloween thing.
Big Halloween corn maze thing here in Colorado. And I ended up running into them there. We ended up just happened to be there the same night. And I did my best to avoid them after I first saw them, but I accidentally did see them and make eye contact with Oliver. Oliver waved at me, and I was nice and waved back. And I saw Abigail standing next to him, and I waved at her, and she looked right through me, like as if I didn't exist. And so I told her, like, I even ran into you guys at Anderson Farms, and like, you looked right through me. And her excuse was, I'm really blind, I just didn't see you. And I was like, yeah, but I know after that, Oliver told you that I was there and pointed me out. So if you didn't see me, why didn't you come seek me out then and talk to me?
Yeah.
So at this point, you've completely blocked me off on my birthday. I've run into you again and you say you didn't see me, but still didn't make any time to talk to me. So I'm here thinking I cannot reach out to you because you made it very clear you want nothing to do with me. But tell me again how it's supposed to be a two-way street, even though those things have happened.
That's the other thing too, is like in a marriage, they say a marriage is never 50-50. Sometimes a marriage is 90-10.
Yes.
And if all you have to give is 10%, then you're giving 100%.
Yes.
We allow grace for one another in situations like marriages, but we don't apply them to our friendships. And like with mental health, we would like to think that our friends would be understanding if we were in a dark, down, bad place. But then when they do it to us, we don't allow them the same grace. And so it's really interesting. Like when you say friendship is a two-way street, like it could be, yes. And if your friend was constantly turning down plans to like make plans with other friends, or, you know, that sort of thing, I would maybe take it personally at that point. But like I said earlier, I have a friend whose calendar is constantly full, and I know it's because of work or because of, you know, studying this, or, you know, working in this program and like volunteering. If they're real life commitments and not just like blowing you off to go hang out with other people, we should allow grace for that. And
Exactly.
I'm always the friend that reaches out, right? Or even with my siblings, I never hear from my siblings, but I make sure to call them.
Yeah.
And it's what you do, and you try not to take it personally. If you and I do have this dynamic. If I don't hear from you and I need to get a hold of you, I just text you again.
Yeah.
And I know it's not because you're blowing me off.
No.
It's because you're working.
It's because I have severe ADHD and sometimes respond in my head.
Or
And
you
don't actually respond.
Or you're working,
Yeah.
or you're studying, and I make sure that you know that I'm here regardless of how much time you have to give to me, because our friendship is valuable not just because of what you give me,
Right.
but because I feel like I can give you something as well.
Agreed completely. And like to even speak to your point about the like hanging out with other people, because this was another really big topic she brought up. She was kind of like, you would blow me off and not hang out with me, but then tell me about how like you went out one random night with, you know, some other friends. And so when I was thinking back on that, I was kind of like, yeah, I did have those small windows of opportunity where a friend asked me in just the right time. Like it was like a Friday night. I was giving myself grace and not working one of my million jobs. And my friends, you know, a friend would invite me out to like a bar or a club. That was how I chose to blow off steam after I was cooped up in all of this. At the same time, in that same time, she consistently talked about how she hated going to bars and clubs now. Her girlfriend worked at a popular gay bar here in Colorado, and she still wouldn't even go to the bar and like be there and watch her girlfriend and be there for her girlfriend because she hated it so bad. So I'd be like, why would I invite you to that? Like, why would I include you when you have set that boundaries that I hate this, but that's how I feel like I want to blow off my steam. And even at that, like there were still times that I would do my best to, even with as busy as I was, get in there and like, it wasn't as often as maybe she would have liked, but I still did my best. And so ultimately, to kind of wrap this up, what ended up happening was I made the decision to take me completely out of her equation completely. And I went ahead and just blocked on all social media accounts. And I think that's going to be the best for me because at this point, I heard the closure I needed. I understand now where things fell and where things are and where her holier than now attitude has come from. One of the things that really hurt me was, you know, she made it a big point to say like, if I let you in as my friend, that's a really big deal. Kind of like insinuating that like it was an honor for me to be her friend or her to be my friend. And like, I ruined that and I tarnish everything. And it's just kind of one of these things of like, you really see yourself as this like big, masterful person who everybody just needs to bend to. And like, please always make sure you talk yourself up and be like, no, this person did not appreciate me, so therefore I needed to drop them. But in her context and in the way she was talking to me about it, it was a dig more than it was to lift herself up and make herself feel better internally. The way she did that was to put me down. So
I think like the big takeaway is like to remember to give others grace where you would expect it.
Exactly. And if you don't have that to give, communicate. That was one of the harder things as well. Like I really wanted you to communicate with me. I didn't know any of this stuff. Or even if I did, I made an assumption about it, but I don't know for sure. So yeah, that was, and I think even bigger for the kind of like positive upswing of all of this is that trust your instincts, love yourself enough to know when you just need to walk away from those toxic relationships. So that is it.
The hardest part. Loving yourself is the hardest part.
You can always say, I love you, but I love me more. Being about it and showing up for yourself is two completely different things. And that's something I've definitely honed in on the most, I think, in these past year and a half. So that's kind of the end of this story.
Round of applause.
Round of applause. I'd give any updates if there were any, but I think the biggest thing I want everybody to take away from this conversation is friendship breakups fucking suck. They're hard. Show up for yourself, though. Always show up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to take care of you the way you take care of you.
And if people are not being forgiving of something that you're going through where they would expect it from themselves, then no, those are not the kind of relationships that you need to like harness and like give growth to. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good way to end that.
I think so too.
Just remember that if you don't laugh about it,
you'll cry.